Hi, I'm Aaron Wallace, Marketing Director with Florida Lawyers Mutual Insurance Company. That's FLMIC, or as we like to say, FLMIC. And for those who don't know us, we are the only lawyers' professional liability insurance provider recommended by the Florida Bar, as well as Florida Association for Women Lawyers, Virgil Hawkins Florida Chapter National Bar Association, and many of the largest local and county level bar associations around the state. You know, as lawyers, often we come out of law school not really knowing a lot about the business side of running a law practice. And of course, one of the most important considerations is legal malpractice insurance. Not necessarily anyone's favorite topic, but nevertheless an important one. So today I want to talk you through some of the questions you want to ask yourself and considerations you want to keep in mind when you're out there shopping for a policy, trying to make sense of it all, and trying to determine which coverage makes sense for you. The first question you want to think about is quite simply, who am I dealing with? You know, here in Florida, we have lots of different types of insurance companies, and even within the legal market, different types of entities offering lawyers' professional liability insurance. For example, here at FLMIC, we are a company that does just one thing in just one state. So providing high quality legal malpractice insurance specifically for attorneys in Florida, that's our whole world. But different companies have different models. So some may operate across multiple lines of business, lines of insurance. They may operate in multiple states. And so as a result, they may have a tendency to pull in and out of the Florida legal market over time. And they do that for a variety of internal reasons. For example, what's happening in their other lines of business or in other states, or even what they're experiencing with lawyers here in Florida on a claims basis. And we have seen just within the past few years, companies withdraw from the Florida legal market. And when that happens, what it does is it leaves Florida lawyers exposed, and it leaves their clients exposed. And in fact, it's for that reason that the Florida Bar created our company, FLMIC, in the 1980s. There was a crisis underway wherein multiple insurance companies were fleeing from the Florida legal market, leaving lawyers and their clients exposed. And so the bar recognized that lawyers here need to have a stable, reliable option for high quality legal malpractice insurance. And so they created FLMIC, and then soon thereafter, the bar divested its ownership so that today we exist as a mutual company owned by the Florida lawyers we insure. And we have continued to do that now for over 30 years. Another thing you want to think about is, what is the company's claims philosophy? So how do they handle claims? And this can be a difficult thing to get a sense of, but ask around. Talk to your coworkers, colleagues, your mentors, your friends, particularly if you know that they've had a claims experience, and ask them what it was like, in what ways the company did or didn't step up to the plate. Because this really is where the rubber hits the road when you're talking about insurance, right? It's if and when a claim gets made against you, how are you treated during the claims process? You want to think about things like, who's going to handle my claim and where are they located? Here at FLMIC, because we are a Florida-specific company, we're able to put a real live claims specialist here in Florida on the case for you. And so we're never farming you out to a 1-800 number where you end up talking to somebody in a different state who maybe doesn't know the Florida legal market. Instead, we're giving you that local, customized, personalized experience. Different companies do have different approaches to claims. So for example, some of the larger companies very often will look to get in, settle, and get out as quickly as possible. And that's all right, and that may make sense in some situations. But I think it's really a question of, do you want a company that will listen to you as the lawyer and value your perspective on how a claim gets resolved, particularly with respect to any potential reputational damage, which is very often a concern in these matters. Some of the larger companies may be handling thousands of claims over the course of a year, and so they just don't have the capacity to give you the personalized time and attention that you might be looking for if you find yourself in one of these situations. One thing I often say when I'm out meeting and talking with other lawyers around our state is, even very good lawyers can and do get sued. And so even though it's not something anyone really wants to think about, you do want to fast forward in your mind a little bit and anticipate that potentiality and ask yourself, if that were to happen to me, God forbid, who do I want on the case and how do I want to be treated during the claims process? And it's important to think about that at the time that you're making decisions about your coverage. Another question you want to ask yourself is, what am I buying? Absent having taken an insurance course, you don't necessarily come out of law school knowing a whole lot about the ins and outs of legal malpractice insurance, but there really is a lot to know. And so we'll walk through some of the basics here now, but the first thing I want to say right out the gate is that it's not required in Florida. So there are some states that require every attorney member of the bar to carry legal malpractice insurance, but Florida is not one of those states. So you do have the option here of quote unquote going bare, as people say, which is to proceed to practice law without any malpractice insurance. But that's a real risk proposition. Again, as I just said, even very good lawyers, even very careful lawyers do get sued. And so you're really running the risk that, you'll make a mistake. And look, everyone makes mistakes. And if you do make a mistake and there is a loss and you don't have insurance, it's not just you really who could suffer, but it's ultimately the client who may suffer. And at the end of the day, as lawyers, the client is who we are all here to serve. And so you want to be mindful of that at the time that you're shopping for insurance as well. You also want to think through the question of how much coverage do I need? And certainly there's the option of getting the bare minimum coverage, and that can be a seductive option. Obviously, financial considerations are important and financial demands can be challenging, and we understand that. But it's really the same conversation that you have with other types of insurance. And auto insurance is a great example. If you're a personal injury lawyer, you have probably counseled a client at some point against carrying the bare minimum auto coverage. And you do that because not only do you understand the risk of loss that's there, but you also understand that having those lower limits can really restrict your ability to work through a resolution later down the road. And so the same thing is true with professional liability insurance. So you want to think through the coverage that you might need ahead of time. You also want to understand that when we're talking about legal malpractice insurance, or errors and omissions, or E&O insurance, as it's sometimes called, we're talking about a claims made and reported policy as opposed to an occurrence policy. So when you talk about something like, again, auto insurance, that's an occurrence policy, right? So it's the date when the accident happens or the date when the loss is incurred that is relevant. With lawyers' professional liability insurance, we aren't so interested in the date on which the alleged malpractice happens as we are in the date when the claim arises. So the date when the lawsuit or the demand letter is received. That's an important distinction. Lawyers sometimes coming out of law school don't realize, and they may find that, in their first year of practice, they have a lower rate, and then that rate may go up during those first few years of practice. And why does that happen? And this is just true, generally speaking, across the board. It's because while there may be a risk of malpractice happening during that first year, the claim for that malpractice probably won't arise until the next year or maybe the year after. And so that's why there's that initial rise early on in practice. I think it's also important to really understand the policy terms, and in particular, any beneficial terms that might be included with one company's policy, but not with another's. So a great first example of this is the question of, are defense costs included within the limits? So this is the question of, for every dollar that's spent on the cost of defending against a claim that's been made against you, is that then reducing the amount that's available to satisfy a settlement or a judgment on the underlying claim? It's important to think about, because if you have lower policy limits, what that can mean in practice is that there may be essentially less that your defense counsel can do for you without jeopardizing the ability to satisfy the claim. So when you're out shopping for a policy, you want to ask providers this question: are defense costs included within the limits, or are they outside the limits? There are some companies, like Fleming, that set defense costs outside the limits up to a certain amount. What that does is it preserves a greater percentage of the policy so that it's available should you find yourself with a settlement or a judgment on the underlying claim. You also want to ask, does my deductible count toward defense costs, indemnity costs, or both? And so this really is the question of when that first bill comes in from defense counsel, who's going to pay the first dollar toward that bill? Is it you or is it the insurance company? Now, my preference would be that my deductible goes entirely toward indemnity costs. That way, the insurance company is essentially on the hook for paying that first dollar on that defense counsel bill. And that way, if I ultimately prevail in the case, I don't have to pay a deductible. You also want to ask, is my deductible a per claim deductible or an aggregate deductible? So some companies will require you to meet a deductible each and every time a claim arises, even if multiple claims arise within the course of a single year. And that's not unheard of, particularly if you're in high volume work, high volume PI work, for example. And so if you have a deductible that's say $5,000, $10,000 and you face multiple claims in the course of a year, this can really make a big difference. Whereas with FLMIC, we have an aggregate deductible, which means that you would only have to meet the deductible once per policy term, even if multiple claims arise during the course of that term. You also want to ask about any special coverages that might be included automatically or as a standard feature on your policy. For example, here at FLMIC, we include as a standard feature on all policies, cyber liability coverage up to a certain amount. That's something that some companies do and some companies don't. We also offer a number of policy features that we believe set us apart and really add value for our policyholders. We're also always looking to add value outside of the policy. And so, for example, we offer a robust library of free CLE videos streaming online at your convenience, many of which are exclusive to our insured lawyers. We also offer risk management resources, a risk management hotline, and a variety of other features and services. So I would invite you all to come spend some time with us on our website at flmic.com. That's FLMIC.com, and learn more about who we are, what we do, and how we're different from some of the commercial providers in this same space. If you have questions, I hope you'll reach out. You can contact me directly, aaronw@flmic.com. You can contact the company at mailbox@flmic.com, or just go to our website and click the Contact Us tab. You can also always contact the Florida Bar and they'll put you in touch with us. I want to thank you for your time. I hope this has been a helpful resource for you. And on behalf of everyone at FLMIC, stay safe and take care. Thank you.